An Israeli Bedouin man was just freed by the Israeli army after over 300 days of cruel captivity in a Hamas terror tunnel in the Gaza Strip. But who are Israeli Bedouins? Let's explore. Shalom, my friends. This is Akiva Gersh with Israel in 5, where we give you everything Israel in 5 minutes. Please like and subscribe. And if you have any questions or want to keep the conversation going, please do so below in the comments. Bedouin is an Arabic word meaning desert dweller. And Bedouins in general, including Israeli Bedouins, were traditionally hundreds of years ago and thousands of years ago, stretching back many, many thousands of years, were nomadic tribes wandering through the desert, changing location depending on climate conditions, food resources, and of course, water. Israeli Bedouins come from tribes that would be nomadic, would travel between what we call Saudi Arabia today and the Sinai Peninsula. That was their region, that was their area. Those were the lands where they traveled through in order to find food and to find water. They're in the middle of the desert, so water was very, very scarce, and they needed to move quite often depending on water resources being available or moving when they dried up. This is the way they lived their lives for thousands and thousands of years and separated into many different tribes and clans. One of the things that they did to provide a profession for themselves, so to speak, was to bring people through the desert. They knew the desert literally like the back of their hand. They were masters of the desert. They were experts of the desert. And people who needed to travel through the desert, who didn't know the way or the ways of living even temporarily in the desert, would hire them and travel with them, using them as guides throughout the desert. Now, again, the Bedouins, they lived this way for thousands of years, and then modernity came, and the modern day world, and countries forming in the Middle East, in a place where only empires ruled for thousands of years. And starting during the Ottoman rule of the Middle East, Bedouins started to settle down. That process continued under the mandate given to the British after World War I, and continued even more under Israeli rule after 1948. Basically, you can imagine these nomadic tribes living in the desert, moving from place to place in the desert, and then all of a sudden borders form around them, and they're literally trapped inside these borders. Whoever was in Israel lived in Israel. Whoever was in Jordan lived in Jordan. Same thing with Egypt. And so the borders that were imposed in the Middle East starting after World War I really impacted the lives of the Bedouins, because it really forced them even more so to settle down, and they became citizens of these countries. Today, there are over 200,000 Bedouins living in Israel. They are full citizens, get full rights, education, healthcare, everything else. Israeli through and through. Bedouins are Arabic. Their main language is Arabic. They do learn Hebrew in schools, and their religion is Islam, right? So they're Arab, Muslim, Israelis, right? They're different than other Arab Israelis because they come from this Bedouin lifestyle, these Bedouin tribes, right? Most of the Bedouins in Israel live in the Negev, in the desert in the south of Israel. Starting in the 1960s, Israel started to build towns for them, because traditionally, right, even when they started to settle down, the way that they lived was very, very different. They didn't live in typical towns or typical cities. They lived in kind of sprawled out villages, right, using all kinds of found materials to create small homes for themselves. They raised animals, so they had many, many animals, tens of thousands collectively, hundreds of thousands even, in their villages. They lived a very, very simple life on the land, close to the land. Starting in the 1960s, the late 1960s, Israel started to build townships for them throughout the Negev. In total, eventually, 7 of these towns were built, the largest of them being Rahat. And now today, over half of the Bedouins in the Negev don't live in these villages. They live in towns that you drive through. They look more or less like other Israeli towns in the way that they're built and spread out and laid out. Now, an important thing about Israeli Bedouins to know is that they do go to the army, right? Because they know the desert so well. They are trackers, and many of the Israeli Bedouins who go to the IDF, who serve in the IDF, put on the uniform, they will serve as trackers in elite tracking units working along the borders, looking for people infiltrating, maybe also smugglers and all kinds of other people that Israel does not want in his country. So it's an interesting connection and reality that Israeli Bedouins have here in Israel. On some level, they didn't mean to be Israelis, right? The modern world closed in on them with the modern day borders that were created after World War One. On another level, they're part of Israeli society. Some of them serve in the IDF, and more of them have been integrated into the general Israeli society. If you go down south in Israel, and specifically go to Beersheba, which is one of Israel's largest cities, you will see Bedouins on the streets, in the markets, working in the stores, in the hospitals. Right? It's a very kind of integrated city in that kind of way. The man who was kidnapped by Hamas on October 7th, who just got freed yesterday, he was working as a security guard on a kibbutz in a community along an Israeli community along the Gaza border, and he was captured, taken hostage on October 7th. Right? Other Bedouins were taken hostage as well, and other Bedouins were killed by Hamas terrorists on October 7th. So though they are different than the typical Jewish Israeli in that they're Bedouin and they're Arab and they're Muslim, they share the same fate. And all of Israel celebrated yesterday at the news of the freeing of this Israeli Bedouin man. And we're so happy that he is now home with his family. All the best and be well.